Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you very much for joining us on this webinar. Thank you very much for sharing your Tuesday afternoon with us. So this is probably the first ever Source webinar where we've actually turned our cameras on, because we pretend not to be shy, but we try to make it all about the content and not about us ourselves. But we've got such a handsome young man with us today in John Kefford that we just had to turn the cameras on. So um, first of all, John, thank you very much for joining us.
No problem, Chris. Good to be here.
So we are going to be talking. I mean, look at that title, "Funding the Unfundable." Who wouldn't want to watch a webinar about this? But actually, the structures and the stuff that we're going to talk about isn't just about funding those really tricky deals or finding that funder who's going to give you exactly what you want. This is the stuff that we're going to talk about today applies to pretty much every property deal, and it also makes any property deal much more likely to get funded just because of the process that we're going to give you towards the end. So this applies to everybody, not just those really tricky deals to fund, which is probably why we've got so many people on this webinar. So, a bit of webinar housekeeping to start off with. We are recording this webinar. You've probably got a notification about that. But you can ask questions during this webinar, and actually, we're going to have a Q&A section towards the end. Now, you should have a Q&A in your menu that you can see in front of you right now, the Zoom menu. You should have a section where you can ask questions, and that's called Q&A. So if you go into the Q&A section and you type your question out there, then we have to address that question before we can move on to the next one. So you put your question in there, and it makes sure that we're going to provide an answer for your question. So please use that if you want to ask any questions. If you ask questions as we're going through the webinar, what we might do is we might leave them until we get to the Q&A section instead of answering them at the time. So just bear that in mind that we won't answer straight away. So if you've got a question, make sure that you've put all the information that you need to in the question and we've got the context of what you're talking about. And then when we get to the Q&A section, we will, of course, address that. So without further ado, because I appreciate there's going to be some people that are on their lunch breaks at the moment, including me and John. So let's get on with it and let's talk about funding the unfundable.
Just want to say there's no such thing as a stupid question. So anything on your mind, please fire through.
And John's actually funding some stuff for me at the minute. So, I go to him with plenty of questions. And if my questions are not seen as stupid questions, then I'm sure yours won't be either. But actually, before we get on to the next slide, John, do you want to just tell us a little bit about your past and why we're having this conversation about particularly difficult deals to fund with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've worked in the mortgage industry for over 20 years now. I started in the residential space for normal residential properties. So the properties you live in, where you kind of do a normal residential mortgage with Halifax, Santander, and that West. And about 5 years ago, probably entered the specialist space where we kind of started at buy to let, then kind of moved into short-term finance, bridging, and then full development. And it's an area that I absolutely love, to be honest with you, because although there's probably about 200 lenders in this space, but most people would never have heard of before. And I
Mm.
always say to people, there's a lender for everyone. It's just a question of picking the right lender, which is kind of our job basically. And here at Sourced, we see weird and wonderful properties all the time. And one of the reasons why we're doing this webinar is to kind of put it out there actually that we're here to help. And like, as I said, there's always a lender for everyone. So no deal is too crazy. No deal is too big or too small. We're here to help everyone. And that's the point of the webinar, basically.
And look, let's not beat around the bush, right? This is a human nature thing. I imagine most of the people on this webinar that are watching this have got some kind of weird and wonderful deal that they want to be funded. So, you are going to learn about the process of how to put these deals together and what lenders look for, and how this industry, this part of the industry, this niche in the industry, is absolutely bloomed over the last few years. Um, but that's exactly why we're here to look at that kind of deals. And John's a lot like me in that, John could talk about property all day long and not get bored, and not feel like he's done a proper day's work. And I'm exactly the same. So without further ado, let's go. So the reason that deals fail, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk through the slide, and then at the end of the slide, John, if you can come in and comment on like the stuff that we've highlighted in the slide. So most property deals don't fail because they're intrinsically bad deals. They tend to fail because they've been structured badly. So the conventional kind of assumption, and this is what happens, this is kind of the mortgage broker assumption, not the development or not the investor broker assumption. The normal sort of mortgage broker assumption is that deals are like a plug and play, that like, all the lenders are going to pretty much do the same thing. They're all going to have the same criteria. Um, it's just a case of bringing in somebody's property, doing a bit of a financial profile on that person, and then putting them in front of a lender. And really, the only thing that changes is the rates from one lender to the next, depending on the products that are out there. And actually, I saw yesterday that Lloyd's Bank? I saw a big billboard saying you can now a 95% mortgage is available again. So these rates kind of change all the time. Um, and if one of those lenders says no, then pretty much everybody else is going to say no. So this is the misconception, the conventional kind of way that people think about deals, and that basically brokers, all they do is they put your details into a system and they tell you all the rates that are available, and that's it. And that could not be further from the truth, especially when you're looking for creative funding options. Um, Really, the deals require a level of understanding that the mortgage kind of broker level of understanding just isn't good enough. Your broker, John, will have to have lots of conversations with you, long conversations about exactly the structure of the deal, how the deal works, because you as the developer, you're going to put this property deal together from a property point of view. And then what John's going to do is he's going to take that deal and he's going to put it together from a financial point of view to make it as fundable as possible for the person for the lender that's going to be funding it. So unfundable is a very specific thing to that one lender that you've talked to. Whereas the next lender that you talk to might think it's their bread and butter. It's exactly what they're looking for. And that's where the broker comes in to help you find that lender. So I propose this as like John's new title for his business card, that the broker's job is he's a deal architect. And that's absolutely true, right? He's putting this thing together because he understands what the lenders are looking for. He understands what you're trying to do from it. And he's trying to marry those two things up so that you can talk to each other. And like John just said, there's 200 lenders in this space at the moment. So the likelihood of I mean, a lot of them don't accept applications directly. You have to go through a broker, but even if they did accept applications directly, you still might not be presenting yourself to the broker that's gonna be your broker. And John said something to me this morning, which was there's a funder out there for everyone, right? There's a funder out there that's going to be the most appropriate for you, and it's the broker's job to try and find that. So what we're going to talk about is what goes into structuring a property deal and how funders don't do that. And from your point of view, the learning point from this slide is that lenders they don't look at properties. What they're looking at is risk, especially these short-term lenders. So they're not looking at the property itself. They're looking at the overall risk. So I tell you what, John, there's a couple of questions in there for you. So first of all, do you want to tell us the difference between bridging finance and mortgages? Do you want to give us an overview on that?
Yeah.
And I'll ask you one question at a time. So go for that first, and then I'll come back to me and I'll
Okay.
ask you the
Okay.
next
Well,
question.
I'll go back one step actually and look at like if you look at
Okay.
like the conventional assumption here. So this is probably the conventional assumption here is probably if you're like a residential mortgage broker, which most mortgage brokers in the country are. And I remember when I was a mortgage broker, someone would come to me a slightly complicated deal. And knowledge is power. Right? I didn't know anything about the specialist market. And I said no to a lot of people that actually now I would say yes to. So that's the first thing I'd say is kind of if a mortgage broker is saying no, go and speak to someone else like ourselves, because there probably is a way of doing it. So on the conventional side of things, it's more about the client than the property. And on the specialist side, it's more about the property than the client and
Yeah.
kind of view it like that. So what I mean by that is on the residential side, most lenders do the same thing. Halifax, Santander, NatWest, they all do the same criteria. They just have slightly different rates. So they look at your income, they do a credit check. If you pass those together, it's just a question of who's got the cheapest rate. On the specialist side, as I said, it's all about the property. And you want to look at the property first and kind of work backwards, basically. So that's the real fundamental difference with this. And on the left hand side, you don't have to have found a property. On the right hand side, you pretty much do. Just going back to kind of bridging and mortgages and that kind of thing. So Mortgages is what we call term finance. So that's, a conventional 25-year mortgage where they'll lend you a certain amount of money for X amount of time and you pay that back over a monthly period, basically. Bridging is slightly different. It's short-term finance. So, the maximum term you can have is about 2 years. But normally you wouldn't want it more than, say, 12 to 18 months, depending on the project. It's very flexible, it's very quick, and a lot of it is about the property that you're going to purchase. And it's normally for properties where you're going to be doing some renovation work, or there's something funny about that property that a conventional lender might not want to lend initially, but once you change it, then they'll be able to lend it. So it's kind of, as the term gives it away, it's a bridge basically from purchasing to getting a normal mortgage.
Yeah, okay. So most people will have heard of bridging finance, especially if they're on this webinar about unfundable deals. So if people have heard of bridging finance, but they've not actually used it themselves, they're probably going to have heard the rumor, the the sort of the thing that everybody talks about as soon as you mention bridging, which is, oh, it's expensive.
Hmm.
So do you want to talk us through that idea, that reputation that it has?
Yeah, I'd say it's a means to an end. Okay, it's a little bit more expensive than a conventional mortgage, but it might not be always. So, there's two kind of bigger fees, shall we say, that you've got to kind of pay up front, which you might not do on a residential mortgage, but on a specialist mortgage you probably will. So the first is like the arrangement fee. So this can be built within the mortgage itself, and it's normally anywhere between 1 to 3%, depending on the lender, that you'd have to kind of absorb upfront. The next is the interest rate they charge. So unlike a normal mortgage where, you know, it's 5% per annum, shall we say, they normally charge it on a monthly basis because they know it's short-term finance. They know you're only going to have this product for anywhere between 1 day to 6 to 12 months, basically. So the interest rate is normally charged on the monthly basis, and it's around about 1% a month. You can get it a bit lower. I think they start at just over 0.5%, and you can get it a bit higher than 1%. But on average, it's between 0.7 to 1% a month. So if you have this for 25 years, it's expensive because it's 12% a year, right? But you're only going to really have this between, like I say, 3 months to 9 months, shall we say. And during that time, if you're adding value to that property, okay, it might cost you an extra £5,000 in interest, but if you're adding 35 to £40,000 on that property, then that expense is absorbed.
Yeah. So as like an overview, as a snapshot as to the differences between bridging finance and mortgages, would you say that on bridging finance you can tend to borrow a little bit more than you maybe could on a mortgage because a mortgage is very conservative lending. It's for a shorter period of time, but it it allows you to get access to the profit level that's available in that property in a way that the mortgage might not, because the mortgage is going to lend you 75% of the agreed purchase price of that property. So you're probably borrowing less. So you need more money in your own pocket. But and if you've got that money in your own pocket, then you've got access to that lower cost finance. But if you haven't got that money in your pocket, then bridging finance will still give you access to that profit level from which you can help to pay off the bridging finance.
Sure. There's another big part of the bridging world as well, which is the auction finance side. So auction property is really popular at the moment because it is tough to sell properties out there. So more
Mm.
and more people are putting their house on the auction basically because they know it's a quick sell. Invariably you got to purchase the property within 28 days, which anyone who's ever bought a property before, 28 days is a very tight time frame. So you have to use some kind of auction finance for this because they use title insurance and you can use ABMs and that kind of thing. So that's a really big market for bridge at the moment, is kind of sticking to that 28-day time frame basically. So it's another reason why you'd use bridge and finance. And then obviously once you bought the property, then you can refinance it to a normal kind of conventional mortgage. But I would always recommend some kind of bridging finance to purchase a property at auction.
Yeah. Okay, thanks for that. We'll move on to the next slide. So the myth of broker access. So this is but what we mean by broker access is that the access that the brokers have to the lenders. So how many lenders did you say there are out there in this space at the moment, John?
So we have access to kind of over 200.
Uh-huh.
I've lost count over 200 to be honest with you, but yeah, over 200 these days.
Yeah, okay. So a lot of the brokers will come out and they'll say that they've got access to specific or they've got specific stuff that they have access to, whereas really
Mm.
a lot of the lenders will be available to the majority of brokers.
Mm. I
However,
think this, yeah,
which
cool.
which lenders the broker works with depends on how much effort the brokers put into, um, working with that lender. So there needs to be an element of networking between those two, between the broker and the lender, and that process needs to get set up between them before they work together. So how many lenders do you think an average broker will work with?
Well, the average broker works under what's known as a network. Okay, so that network are kind of the wrap around the broker that provides lots of things for them. The technology they use, the compliance side of things, the sourcing systems, and they'll also provide what's known as a panel of lenders. And
Yeah,
the major networks, although there's kind of over 200 lenders, will pick and choose only a very limited number of lenders. And that can be only up to about 30, to be honest with you. And a lot of those lenders will be for what they invariably do most often. So if you're a residential broker, most of those lenders are going to be your high street banks to do normal residential lending, and you may only
yeah.
have one or two specialist lenders.
So
Um,
if somebody goes to that broker with like a commercial to residential conversion, then that lender's going to be pretty useless at finding the right lender to lend on that product. And looking back at the conventional sort of thought process that we looked back on the previous slide, that broker's going to say, no, it can't be funded. And now if that person
exactly that.
if
Yeah.
that person doesn't know about all the options and know about this structure and how brokers work, they might walk away from that deal thinking that it's unfundable. Whereas really, there is a different broker that's got access to a different lender that could fund that deal, right?
That's exactly it. And like I said, I did a lot of that when I was a residential broker. I used to say no quite a lot of times, to be honest with you, because I just didn't know, to be fair,
Yeah.
what was out there. Now, there are other kind of lenders called packages. So people on the webinar might have heard this. So they're kind of brought up by the fact that a normal broker would say no or didn't know where to put this deal. They had absolutely no idea. They'd never seen it before. They'd probably never done bridging before. So they could then phone this other brokerage up in effect to say, look, I've got this client. What do I do here? And then they would then refer this client to a packager. And that's fairly popular at the moment. However, packages invariably charge a lot more money to the client than a specialist broker would.
Right. And is the charge that they have reflected on the value that they give, in your opinion?
Yeah, look, yeah, different packages charge different things. To be fair, I've never really used a package, so I don't know how much. But we get a few clients where they might be just comparing quotes, whatever that being. Let's just say we can always undercut them.
Okay. Good to know. So the broker, what the broker is going to do with you is they're going to interpret the deal. So when you're putting a deal together, thinking that you're going to be able to have a conversation with a broker that has access to bridging finance, and that's going to be a quick 5 minute thing, and you're going to get a rate back fairly quickly, is probably the wrong way to look at this. What you're trying to do, I would imagine, is make tens, if not hundreds of thousands of pounds. And so you need to invest the time and effort into allowing that broker to really get to know your deal. So each conversation that you have, you need to go into it and be prepared. Be prepared to have a long conversation. Be prepared to answer, sorry, probably some quite difficult questions and quite personal questions straight away, because it all matters for that broker to marry you up with the right lender to move that forward. So first of all, the deal interpretation, and the more access and the more, look, I don't want to use the word, but let's be honest, it is honest. So the more honest you are with the situation of the deal, and the more information you can give that broker, the better they're going to be able to match you up with somebody who will actually be able to fund your deal. Because this is all about getting it funded in a couple of months' time, not about that conversation you have, but they're very much linked. The broker is going to look at the risk appetite, your risk appetite, the risk appetite of the lender, and the risk that's involved in the deal. And obviously, the broker is going to do the best job that they can to mitigate for those problems, and put that together so that the when it gets presented to the lender already has all of their questions answered. So by the time it gets to the lender, it's not coming back to you to answer questions, and then you go back to the lender, and then you come back to you, and it goes backwards and forwards because that all adds time to getting your deal funded. And the longer it takes to get your deal funded, the more likely it is that somebody else is going to step in and probably take your deal. Because up until the point that you know that you've got your funding in place and you go through exchange, there's always a risk that that property can get taken away from you. So the better you go to your broker with the honest and comprehensive information, the quicker they can put you in place with the lender, and the quicker you can get your deal through exchange and then therefore to completion. Would you agree with all of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I tell people all the time, the cheapest lender might not be the best lender for you. Okay. It's key that, the lender we go with, what we don't want to do is put you with a lender and that lender ultimately says no in 3 weeks, 4 weeks, five
Mm,
weeks, 6 weeks. Okay. So, as you said at the beginning, Chris, about kind of that deal interpretation, getting to know all the bits and pieces with regards to that deal up front is key because you may have spent some money on valuation fees, you may have spent some money on solicitors' fees. And then, if we do have to kind of put you with another lender, which I do see quite often in other brokerages, then you're going to be paying two, three kind of different valuation fees. So how I kind of look at things, and it's really key to this, is the property itself first. What do you want to do with that property? If you'll refurbish it, are you converting it? Are you just going to have it as a buy to let? Are you going to have it as an HMO? Whatever it might be, the end point is where you want to start with, basically. And then you kind of work backwards. Okay, do you need any money for the refurbishment? Um, how long are you going to have? What's your long-term strategy for this property? What kind of arrangement for tax are you going to put it in? Is it going to be a limited company? If it's a limited company, what kind of limited company are you going to have it in? Are you going to have your kids on there? Are you going to have alphabet shares? Are you going to have holding companies? These are all the questions you need ironed out before you even get to kind of sourcing the kind of lender, basically.
because if you think
Once you
about
kind
it,
of,
sorry,
oh,
go on, John.
no, 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 you're right.
Because if you think about it, when you've got a build schedule, if you've got a big project and you've got a build schedule, you are literally working by the week, aren't you? And if you're a week behind, you get all you guys together and you're like, right, we're a week behind. How are we going to make this up? And we're talking about wasting 3 to 5 to 6 weeks at the very beginning because the lender that you've gone with, because you haven't given the broker all the information, isn't the right lender to take this forward. So that's how critical all of this stuff is. Not only, are you going to be potentially months behind, but also you might lose the deal in the first place. So coming to the broker prepared is absolutely, absolutely critical. Make sure we use deal calculators here at Sourced. We've got a really comprehensive deal calculator. So if I'm having a conversation with John, the first thing I'll do is email him this deal calculator and then go and have a conversation with him so we can see all of the numbers and I get all of the planning information, all the relevant stuff to that deal. I'll make sure that I have with me so I can go talk to him about the full and comprehensive details of the deal. Right?
One thing that's really common in the industry at the moment is people that want to buy buy-to-let properties, and they buy a property that they're interested in that does need refurbishment at
Yeah.
different levels. But the lenders now have a high bar, basically. So if you go to, one of the bigger lenders, a TMW or BM Solutions, who offer the lowest rates, they will say on the day of completion, you have 2 weeks to basically get a tenant in, and they kind of
Wow.
don't want you to do any renovation. Like the property has to be turnkey, basically. But a lot of people will say, right, okay, I'm just going to buy this property. I'm going to do a new kitchen, a new bathroom, it needs new carpets, and then kind of get it tenanted 5 to 6 months down the line. Okay. So what happens a lot is the valuers that go to that property, they know that the lenders have a higher bar now. So they'll put a nil value on this property because they'll say, look, it needs a new kitchen, it needs a new bathroom. Is just not acceptable for that lender.
Mm.
But people go that route despite sometimes the best advice because they know it's going to be the cheaper way. But ultimately, that costs you time and money because you spent a valuation. Again, you might have spent legal costs, that kind of thing. Whereas you should have just gone for a more amenable lender in the first place. So that's
Yeah.
something we see quite a lot. It lands on my desk where a client's come to us because they've been somewhere else. It's been declined for that particular reason, and then we look to be a more amenable lender, basically.
Got you. So standard brokers, and specifically looking at like kind of mortgage brokers that might move over into the sort of investment market, the bridging market. They kind of have a more checklist approach because you can as a mortgage broker. You know, that's possible as a mortgage broker, but it isn't possible when you move over into the investment side of the world. So it's not the deal that's being funded. It's not the deal that isn't being funded. It's because the deal hasn't been structured. So tell us about some of the things that you'd be asking. You know, what are the, you know, the first 10 questions that you have as soon as you come to a new client. What are you looking at, John?
Yeah, so I think the first thing is, can you send me a link of the property, basically, so I can have a look if it's on Rightmove or on an auction site, wherever it might be. So have a look at that property, and you can tell a lot from that property, basically, and you can find out lots of information. The second thing I would normally ask a client is, okay, what are the potential pitfalls with this property that you think are? So you might know that this property might have a short lease, it might be flying freehold, there might be something reason why, if it's you're getting it cheap, what is that reason why you're getting it cheap? Okay. And that's really important sometimes because, again, if you know all these answers up front, we can steer you towards the right lender, basically. And that doesn't necessarily mean it's not going to be more expensive. It just means we pick the right lender for you, basically. And all the lenders do something slightly different. The third thing I would say is, what is your end usage for this property? So if you're going to refurbish it, what type of refurbishment are you going to do? Is it going to be an HMO? Are you going to convert it into an MUFB? Is it going to be, I don't know, semi-commercial maybe, or the other way around? So
So what would you
having that.
do? What would you do if somebody came to you and said, oh, well, it might be a HMO or I might just do it as a buy to let. I haven't made my mind up yet.
Okay, so the first thing I would say is just check if it's an Article 4 area. Okay, because that would be a big determining factor in whether or not you are going to convert it to an HMO. Okay, lots of people, we do lots of HMO conversions, right? Because, why wouldn't you to get that kind of higher rate of rent that you receive? Okay, and better yield. So I think the first thing you just need to check if it's an Article 4 area. That would be the big determining factor, basically. And then how easy or hard it is to convert. Obviously, you've got room sizes, communal areas, that kind of thing to think of. I always steer people to the local authority websites. We can get loads of information about HMOs and their room size and that kind of thing. Communal areas is a big thing, but it's different. Local authorities have different sizes, so some, it's to do with the kitchen. You can have a nice communal area kitchen, they're perfectly happy. Others, they say no, you have to have a kitchen and a sitting room or a lounge or something like that. So again, that varies around the country. But there's an extra things you need to check obviously with regards to the selective licensing and that kind of thing as well. So you need to do a little bit more research, but it can obviously be way more beneficial for you, basically.
Okay. So let's have a look at some, like I said, I imagine most people that are on here have got some kind of scenario that they're currently working with or thinking about working with that is difficult to fund or they predict it's going to be difficult to fund. So let's have a look at some of the most common ones. So income profile or somebody that doesn't have a regular income. So let's how would you go around that? How would you package that up? How would you choose the lender for somebody that's got this as an issue, John?
Hmm. So yeah, it depends on whether you're looking at an investment property or a residential property. Um, Now, if you're looking at kind of the residential property where income, is important, then there are most high street lenders you'd want you to have at least 2 years worth of SA 302s if you're self-employed. It's normally the self-employed model where it's deemed as a bit more complex. It doesn't always have to be. But most of it is. So there are lenders now that would just do 1 year's accounts. Um, but I think it's the key is, as we talked about, it's kind of talking to the customer through, right, let's see evidence of what you've got. Because a lot of people would say, right, I earn £45,000. Okay, well, can you show me that evidence first? Evidence as much as you can. And then from the evidence we see, we know which lender to place. So if you do have just 1 year's worth of SA 302s, okay, fine, that lender will we know will do that. If, for example, you have foreign income or foreign assets, or you
Mm.
have a large property portfolio where a lender will stress test that, loads of these things, as I said, there's a lender for everyone, but we need to know your whole holistic picture, which is the key. Okay. Um, and the more information we know, the best place we can place it.
Okay.
If it's
Next one.
for, sorry, just so if it's for investment properties, again, as obviously I'm sure people know on this webinar, then income is less important. You still most of the time need to have an income because they need to make sure
Mm,
you can afford any void periods in your properties and that kind of thing. But there are some lenders that have no minimum income requirement, so that doesn't necessarily mean you don't have to have an income. You just have to have a low income to cover those voids. Mainstream lenders start at about 20,000 for your income. You might need to just show one pay slip. Sometimes they'll just do an online verification where you don't need to prove any income. But again, we can help you and guide you through that. And the more evidence we see, we know where to place it, basically.
yeah. All right. Next one. Somebody that has come to you because they require a high loan to value because they don't have like a traditional 25% of the deposit in their pocket.
Hmm. So there's probably loads of different strategies we use here actually to help you out. So we do a lot of below market value properties. So these are properties that aren't marketed. They're kind of off the books of Rightmove and that kind of thing. But there's motivated sellers out there that just want to sell for any particular reason. There are lenders out there that can potentially lend you up to 100% of the property value. More commonly between 90 to 95 to 100% of those kind of properties. So that limits your deposit. I think another common strategy we use is asset leverage. So if you own other buy-to-let properties or even your own home, we can leverage the equity you have in that property to use as a deposit um,
Mm.
on the new property, and that is popular at the moment, definitely.
So with the if you're buying below market value, that can reduce the amount of money that you need in your pocket. So do you want to how does that work?
Yeah,
How's
sure.
that mechanism?
Yeah, sure. So essentially, what happens is, so you know this property, just call it 70,000, for example. Okay. So you got a motivated seller, Chris. I don't know, you might be leaving to go to Australia or something, and you want to sell up basically, and you
Hmm.
want a quick sale. Okay. So you might be, the property is maybe worth 110, 120,000, but you've got someone interested who wants to purchase it for 70,000. Okay. So you sell it to me and agree purchase price of 70,000, although on an open market value, the property's worth 120,000. Okay. What the lender will do, and invariably you'd have to go with a short-term lender like a bridging lender. The lender will then send the surveyor to the property, uh, and then that surveyor will obviously give it an open market value. Now, different lenders work in slightly different ways. So some lenders they will tell the surveyor what the purchase price is. Some lenders won't. I kind of like the lenders that don't because invariably you get more of a true market open market value. Then the surveyor will go to the property and say, yeah, it's £120,000. And then the lender will go 75% of that £120,000.
Yeah. Whereas a mortgage lender or somebody that's given traditional finance, they look at the purchase price or the valuation, whichever one's the lowest, and then they'll offer
Yeah,
their loan to value based on whichever one of those two things is the lowest. So
yeah,
in that example, if it's
yeah,
70 grand, they'll offer 75% of 70 grand. So you're able to borrow a lot more money, but because you bought it below market value and the mortgage and the
exactly.
bridging
Yeah,
company looks at the 125, not the 70.
exactly that. Invariably, all mortgage lenders, normal traditional lenders, will just go up the purchase price.
And then there's a bit of a tip here. So I don't know whether John knows about this, but this is definitely something that I talk about in training. Because if you know that that's the system, and you know that that's how more bridging finance companies will look at that situation, you can actually manufacture a below market value purchase by saying to the person that you're buying it from, well, if you need 125 grand to purchase this property. How's about I'll give you 70 grand on completion and the rest of it I'll fund once I sell the property on after I've flipped it. And you'd have to fill in a loan contract, and obviously there's a legal position that you need to confirm to structure it that way. But if you know that if you can create this below market value purchase, that you're going to be able to fund more of it through the bridging broker, then that's a great arrow to have in your thing that holds arrows that's on your back that I can't remember the word for at
Quiver.
the moment. A
The
quiver. Well done. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
So one thing that's actually becoming more and more popular, I think, is called vendor finance, which is
Yeah.
similar to what you're talking about there, and that's probably down to the market at the moment, and obviously it is a buyer's market. Things aren't shifting as quick as they used to be. So
Yeah.
I am seeing a lot of kind of transactions on my desk where similar scenario, right? So I don't know, property's worth 200,000. You can go to that person and say, I'll give you 100,000 now, and then in a year's time or whenever I come to refinance or sell it, I'll give you the other 100,000.
Yeah.
Again, you know, there's a limited market of lenders that will allow that when they have like a second charge of things, but we use lenders all the time that can accommodate that kind of thing.
And just going back to that, you said something to me yesterday that really, really struck a chord because we've already talked that there are like 200 lenders that are in this space. And I can't remember the scenario that we were talking about yesterday, but I gave you a scenario and you came back to me straight away and you said there's probably about 10% of lenders that are interested in that. And that's a
Yeah.
really good guide as to what the rates are going to look like when you put in your numbers together, because the more percentage of that 200 that will fund that, then there's more competition. And the more competition, the lower the rates are going to be. But the fewer lenders that will look at funding that project, then there's less competition and the higher the rates are going to be. So you can work out, obviously, with somebody's help like yourself, who's an expert in this market, you can work out just from that kind of percentage of which lenders are interested in it, whether this
Mm,
is going to be more expensive to fund or less expensive to fund.
mm. I think that case was like a hybrid kind of property where you have kind of a couple of flats in the building that you might own, and two of the flats might be just normal standard lets, and the third one might be slightly bigger, so they converted it into an HMO.
Right.
So again, it's doable, just a limited market.
Yeah. And the third one, we've got a tight timeline. So, with a mortgage company, the standard time for a mortgage to get approved and go through a transaction for a mortgage is about 6 months in the UK at the minute. Bridging finance, is it any quicker?
It is quicker, so you can do it within kind of 2 or 3 days if you've got the right solicitor.
No.
To be honest, with you. Yeah, it does happen.
Wow.
I think even refinance, there are lenders out there will do it same day as well. So it is a lot quicker. They do, you know, people talk about technology and things, I would say in the mortgage world, the technology part comes into the valuations. So there's a lot of kind of information, a lot of data that feeds into a lot of the major systems that quite a few of the lenders use where they don't have to do a physical valuation. So they can find enough about that property to confidently give it a valuation. So
Right.
that plays a major part in speed. So, if they do a desktop valuation, it might not cost you, the client, anything, and you get that in seconds, basically. Another part is the solicitor side of things. Invariably, you have to use a solicitor that's on their panel, and their panel's quite small because they use tried and tested solicitors. They know they can do it within a certain time frame, and these solicitors will take indemnities out against title insurance and that kind of thing to get it over the line. But yeah, kind of 28 days for an auction purchase is your kind of average time, and there's probably, I don't know, probably 50 lenders in that space who can now work towards that time frame. But like I said, we did one 14 days not so long ago. So yeah, you can be quick.
Wow. Phenomenal. So let's have a look at some creative solutions. So again, standard approach is it's a box ticket exercise. You've got to fit into their way of funding. Whereas the way that these guys look at it, the way that bridging finance operates is that it's all about understanding each individual case and placing that case with the right lender that's going to have appetite for that. Um, so commercial, I mentioned commercial to residential. So, how does that look? Are there many funders that are interested in that kind of thing? It tends to be a higher level of funding. So does that mean that it's going to be more expensive because there are fewer funders percentage wise across those 200 that are looking at that? Talk to us about that.
Yeah. So the short answer is it's the same price, I'd say, but I think experience and the amount of the purchase price comes into it. So if you're doing slightly larger projects, your own personal experience or the contractor's experience comes into this a lot. So if you're kind of doing a small flip or small refurb, you can be a first time buyer and there'll be a lender for you basically. But the larger projects you do, invariably, especially if it's a commercial to resi kind of thing, then you're normally looking kind of 10 plus units. So experience plays a massive part in this basically. We've got a nice project at the moment where it's an old mill in Stockport that are being converted into 41 units. And the big thing for that was actually our client didn't have a huge amount of experience, done a couple of flips, but the actual contractor they're using, they're super experienced in that, and that kind of put the lender's mind at rest. So that's another key consideration. I think
So
one
again,
of the oh,
go
go
on,
on.
sorry. No,
But
you go.
one of the kind of things we've done recently, which again I've kind of mentioned before, is very popular, is especially on the flip side of things, is we have a client that saw a property that he just wanted to buy because he could see the potential in that. Okay, so he had some savings, but not a huge amount, and not enough to kind of cover the deposit. So what we did was we used his main residential home, which he had quite a bit of equity in. The lender put a charge on that property to cover the full purchase price amount. And also the lender is then funding the refurbishment work, which is about 50, 60,000. And then once that client achieves the value of that property, you'll then refinance to a buy-to-let mortgage and then redeem the loan with the bridging lender. So that's a really popular transaction at the moment to do. Obviously, by using your own personal home, there's that bringing that added kind of what's it called? Other thing you just need to be careful with is that, they're putting a second charge on that property. So, you are kind of, you have to be a bit careful and confident that this project's going to happen. But, it is a popular funding strategy
It
at the moment.
increases your risk, doesn't it? Because it mitigates
A
the risk
little bit
for the
more
lender,
risky,
right?
yeah, exactly. But, ultimately, as you said with the risk, the lender looks at the whole holistic picture of that property. So if they think that you are kind of overexposing yourself, they wouldn't lend to you. And that's where we come in to guide you as well. But it's a very popular strategy at the moment.
Great, thank you. So how you can start to look at your deals and think about not only does the property deal itself work, is it generating the right return for you? Are you going to make your money back? What does the end value look like, and how does that all fit with the sort of overall investment goal that you have? But now you can start to think about it from a funder's point of view as well. And not only does the deal work for you, but is the deal going to work for a lender? And how easy is it going to be to get that deal through? So they'll the way that you should start looking at it is the way that the brokers look at it, which is to identify the risk, look at the assets potentially. The way that you're going to get funding. Are you going to get funding all in one lump sum at the front? Are you going to get it? Are you going to spread it out over a period of time to reduce the amount of cost that you have? Um, and we're going to look at the phase of like you'll be looking at bridging finance because you think that bridging finance is the right way to go because traditional mortgage funding, like you don't fit into those boxes or it's just too restrictive. And then you and John will come up with a strategy of adding value and making sure that you can mitigate for those risks. And then you go out to the lender. Have you got anything you want to add to that slide, John?
Yeah, so one thing, I always tell clients really popular is look at the exit first, okay?
Mm.
Because everyone just wants to buy that property with as little money as possible, okay? But that can have big knock-on effects on the exit because the smaller the loan to value at the front normally means a smaller loan to value when you either come to sell it or refinance, basically. So always start at the back, be realistic with what you think the GDV or the property is going to be worth at the end, and then we can work backwards. And that's how the lender will view it as well, basically. So, if you think the property is going to be worth 325 at the end, get that comparable evidence from in the area. That's really, really key.
Thank you. So instead of thinking who's gonna lend on this or how can I put this together to get lending, you need to think of it from their point of view. Think of it from the lender's point of view. And like John says, the workflow is to start with that outcome. Start with the outcome. Look at the amount of risk that you've got within the deal, and not just within the deal as well. Like John just said, it's not just the property; it's also you, and it's the person that's delivering that scheme. How likely are they that they're going to? How likely is it that they're going to be able to deliver that scheme? How likely is it that you can deliver that scheme? And it might not just be about individual property deals that you've done and your experience in those individual property deals, because it's a transferable skill. So can you put that transferable skill into the package to then put in front of the lender to show that you've got the right level of skill in order to get this deal done? And after structure, right at the very back, when you've gone through all of that process with your broker, and you're probably best mates by this time. You're probably going out every Friday night, which is why John's never in. You're probably spending a lot of time with your broker before you get to that part where you're fixing up with the lender. So completely different structure if all you've ever done is look at mortgage finance. You
I
want to
think
add anything?
we build like long-term relationships with our clients, definitely. Where, a typical mortgage broker might only see their client once every 2 years or 5 years when their deal is coming up for renewal. A lot of our clients, they kind of buy and sell at least 2 or 3 times a year.
Mm,
Or they have large background properties where we're constantly refinancing. I think the relationship is key, basically, and building that trust is key as well. And like I said, we have lots and lots and lots, if not hundreds, of long-term partners or clients that we work with. And that's the key to this, definitely. It's kind of, like I say, it's building that trust. The client knows we can deliver on what we say we're going to do.
yeah. So right now, we're happy to take some questions. I've already got some questions that are waiting to go, so I'll just fire them up. So I'll leave this framework on the screen that we just talked about, so that you can take a note or get used to it, because that's the way that you should be looking at it when you're approaching a broker, or when you first have a deal that you know is not going to go through a conventional mortgage lender. So while you're having a look at that, I will just get down the questions that I've had. Okay. How do clients, so this is directly to you, John, I'm not going to get involved in this. I'll just ask the question and you can answer it. How do clients build better trust or transparency that brokers are acting on their behalf and not the best commission for the broker? So how do clients build better trust or transparency that brokers are acting on their behalf and not for the best commission?
Sure. Well, one thing I'd say that the market is there's two things that have changed in the market since I first started. The first one's kind of the transparency aspect. So on every mortgage illustration, it should show what the commission the broker is going to receive. And obviously, a lot of the time, a broker might not necessarily charge a broker fee, and so they are relying on that commission. Now, one thing that I think from our kind of point of view is that I'm always kind of, again, comes into the transparency about it, though. It's it's not necessarily choosing, or it isn't choosing the lender that's going to pay the most. And to be fair, most lenders pay the same, okay, especially in the bridging world. Um, Slightly different in the buy-to-let world, but most lenders are there or thereabouts. There's not a lender that charges huge amount more or pay us a huge amount more than another lender. But ultimately, it's about, if we put you with a lender that we get the most from, but doesn't do the deal, then you're never going to kind of use us again, right? So it's about making sure you get the best price with the best lender is where we come from. And transparency plays a big part. If you do a buy-to-let mortgage or residential mortgage, on the illustration, it has on the back all the different lending options for you. It will give you a table on why that particular broker chose that particular lender. You then receive a reasons why letter. Um, Once you've chosen that mortgage, and again, the broker will outline why they've gone with that lender. And again, it's fully transparent. I think in the investment world where it changed, there were investment companies that did pay different, kind of high different commission. In the mortgage world, it's just not there anymore, I'd say. Like I say, all the residential lenders pretty much play the same. The buy-to-let lenders, give or take, pay the same, and the bridging lenders pay the same. So it's not really, I wouldn't say it really, well, it definitely doesn't enter my mind anymore.
And what you just said is a really big selling point for me, because whenever I've taken out finance with especially bridging finance, it'll be a conversation with the broker, and the broker will explain why they're not going with certain lenders. They'll explain why they're not going with certain lenders, and of course, you can take that information, you can research it for yourself,
I
right?
think it's,
And if it
yeah,
makes sense what the broker's saying, and you can find support and evidence for what the broker's saying, then that's what builds the trust, isn't it? Right?
Yeah, I think it's more to do with the price more than anything. So with the rate, so I had a conversation with a client this morning actually who normally uses another broker to buy an auction finance, and they were quoted a very low rate. Okay, and I knew who that lender was, and I was open and honest with that client. I said, yes, you can go with them, but I personally wouldn't use that lender because I know they're not that fast. And when you've got a 20-day completion deadline, would I be recommending that product? Probably not. However, it is the cheapest, and that broker they've used has just gone with the cheapest, which
Yeah.
I said not necessarily the cheapest is the best. It's a lot of the time you're explaining why to that client why you wouldn't use X, Y, and Z lender, basically.
Yeah, we got some really good questions here actually. So the next one is can a multi-unit freehold block, 4 apartments, all under 30 square meters, secure lending? If so, will it be based on commercial valuation?
Okay, really good question. Very technical question, this one.
Mm,
So, one thing to kind of the reason why you kind of highlighted this is when you have a flat, especially if it's a studio flat, most lenders have a minimum square footage, which is normally 30 square meters. Okay. And some lenders are a bit more flexible than others with regards to that square footage. Now, if they're all smaller than 30 square foot, 30 square meters, and they're kind of in the teens or early 20s, then yes, that pool of lenders decreases. Okay, and a lot of it comes down to the client himself, how experienced they are. I would probably say yes, you can absolutely get lending, but you probably wouldn't get an investment valuation on that property. Depending on, did you say four? Yeah, you probably
yeah,
wouldn't get an investment valuation. It'd probably be a bricks and mortar block valuation.
mm.
Um, but there will be a lender for that person. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Next one. Proof of funds for investors. My solicitor has become extremely vigilant in getting full transparency on where investor funds are coming from. Is this a problem via sourced investors?
Okay. So all lenders have obviously AML that they have to kind of tick off, and this is really, really important. Okay. So it's not necessarily, the brokers, you'll find all lenders have this same requirement. So really key that we kind of, again, the transparency when we have that conversation at the beginning, that's the key where different lenders are a bit more flexible where the original funds have come from. So if it's come from abroad, a lot of lenders might not like that, whereas there will be some that are. Okay, so that's the key to where to place the business is one of those questions and key considerations. So intercompany loans, directors loans, family members abroad, selling assets, that kind of thing. You really need to be open and transparent up front.
Thank you very much.
There's been a case recently where, let's just say, a lender hasn't followed the right AML issues, and they've recently gone into administration because of that. So
Oh,
it
wow.
is really key for the lender.
Okay. Next one. Is it true you can buy a property using 100% bridging finance by having a charge on the property that you live in?
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, we do a lot of that all the time. As long as you've got the right equity in the property. So
Yeah,
the lender, the bridging lenders will normally go up to 70% of your residential value minus the current mortgage you have. So as long as they'll use that as the deposit, basically. So you do have to have a decent level of equity in your own home. But yeah, absolutely.
what are the main lending challenges for someone stepping into property investment business full time from a corporate role?
Okay. So I think it depends on your strategy, to be honest with you. So it depends what you're looking to do. Are you looking to build a property portfolio, or are you looking to just kind of get in the renovation flips kind of space? I would say probably the biggest challenge you would probably have, there's two, is probably finding the right properties, and that's where Source can help you. Um, and also with regards to maybe deposit. So we talked about different strategies you can use to limit the amount of deposit you have. But if you don't own a home or you don't have any other assets, you do have to have your 25% at least deposit.
Understood. I have an unencumbered commercial property, freehold in an SPV, that is closing on a new 10-year FRI tenancy, and so looking at releasing the maximum lending to fuel the next investment. Any advice on accessing the best lending options here and how to secure them on market value versus vacant possession? Or would this be better to sell to my SIP and maximize cash out?
That's a very technical
Isn't
question.
it?
Probably email me after with regards to this one, I'd suggest. But commercial is slightly different. In a short answer, the commercial is slightly different to buy-to-let properties. And the lenders in this space normally just lend on vacant possession. But there are things we can do with AVMs, especially if it's unencumbered as well. But yeah, probably need to go in a bit more depth with regards to that one.
Okay. Are there options for of borrowing the full project amount, i.e., property plus refurb costs, which I think you talked
So
about a little bit earlier?
yeah, I think it's the size of the project. I say you need to if you're borrowing against the refurb costs, you do need to have some kind of deposit or use an asset that you already own to kind of get an upfront cost. Normally, you'd need between a 30 to 35% deposit, depending on the lenders and depending on the property. And that's where asset leverage comes in if you don't have that kind of similar amount. But yeah, you would need some kind of skin in the game is what the lender would call it.
Final question. Are there any issues lending to foreign nationals?
Okay, so the short answer is no, because we have lots of lenders, and most lenders that we use are absolutely fine with it. The only kind of asterisk, shall we say, is you do have to be a bit careful of which country. So yeah,
Hmm.
that's the only restriction. But in the short answer, no.
Another question just came through, and I am going to ask it because it's a really good question. And I know this is the kind of question that you'll get quite a lot. And understanding the structure of finance, this is actually quite good. So, once I secure a term loan for my investment property, can I apply again for a bridging loan for the refurb cost?
Okay, so I guess you kind of done it the other way around, I'd say. So you probably
Yeah.
want to do the bridge first and then do the term. And the reason why you'd want to do that is if you refurbish the property, then the value of that property will increase. And then when you come to refinance on the term, you will get more money back. But the short answer to that question is you can, but it wouldn't necessarily be a bridging lender, but you'd have to do some kind of second charge loan. And that would come down to the amount of equity you have left in that property, and it'll probably be a little bit more expensive to do. So you'd want to do the bridge first and then the term, basically.
Because I think what the person that asked that question is thinking of is that you can get development finance, right? So you could get a low cost mortgage for your property, and they're going to lend you 75% of the purchase price, and then you can get 100% development finance to do the refurb cost. But you wouldn't be able to put them together because the development finance is going to want a first charge, and the mortgage is going to be leveraged to the capacity of 75%. So you throw the development finance out because they want the first charge, but the mortgage has got the first charge. But now you think, well, hold on, you can get second charges. So would I be able to get a second charge to come in and give me that development loan? But again, you can't do that because, like John said earlier, you're already mortgaged. Your mortgage is at 75% of the value. And so that development finance or that second charge is going to say, well, our maximum that we'll go to will be 70% of the current value. So you're already above that. So therefore, we would give you a second charge, but the second charge value would be zero because
Yeah,
we can't lend you anymore. So you doing it the other way round is much, like John said, is a much well, you're playing the game. Instead of trying to rewrite the rules for the game, you play in the game by
yeah.
doing it the other way round.
I think a lot of people, again, they look at the initial impact, how much it's going to cost, and they don't necessarily look at the end. And ultimately, if you did it that way, it's going to cost you way more money than actually if you paid a little bit more up front, but did it the correct way, I'd call it. So,
Yeah.
and that comes back to the buy to lets when I said where people, buy a property that needs refurbishment and they just want to do a buy to let property. They just look at, right, what's the cheapest thing I can do now? Whereas actually, if you looked at it, the cheapest thing is to kind of buy it, refurbish it, and then refinance.
Mhm. Yeah, exactly. Really good questions there, everyone. Thank you very much. I would have preferred it if you could have made John sweat a little bit more, but that section took a lot longer than I was expecting. So thanks very much for the questions. Appreciate it. So to close, the distinctions that we're making are that you need to have the information for the deal to start the conversation with your broker. to have a quick conversation with your broker. Yeah, they're going to be able to give you an answer, but that answer might not specifically be the kind of direction that you go because the broker just doesn't have the information that they need in order to give you good, solid, dependable, progressible advice. So the more information you go to your broker with, the better. If you look just over on the right hand side into the blue box, I've given you John's email address. So if you do have any complex cases, or any cases at all that need some kind of feedback, or you're looking for bridging, then please email John at john.kefford at source.co, and he'll come back to you and and yeah, see if he can help you move forward with any of your funding issues. We at Sourced, we have a bigger ecosystem than just the John section of the business, which is the brokers. We have two franchises that we run here, both within property. We have the brokers. We also have uh, a tax system and a banking system called Enterprise that reduces the amount of money that it costs to do standard tax returns and standard bookkeeping for limited companies within the property sector. So again, everything we do here is about property, is about investing in property, and making it more accessible to more people. One of the things that I would say to have a look at, if you do have a look at the sourced ecosystem, are those two franchises, because those two franchises are set up for success. They're set up to make it much more accessible, to give you the training, to give you the support, to give you the leverage, to give you access to people like John. John, he's going to be talking at the Sourced Summit, the annual conference that we hold. He's going to be talking on webinars for our franchisees. And of course, he's always available for a conversation with our franchisees to help them get their deals funded. So that's part of Source that you absolutely should have a look at. And you can see all the information there at source.co. So go and have a look at our website. But I'll leave the floor open to you, John, for your final thoughts before we close the webinar down.
Sure. No, thanks, Chris. I think, well, finally, I hope people found it useful, know a little bit more about kind of what we do, the specialist market. But as I said before, no questions are stupid questions. So please feel free to email me anything you have if you want a second opinion on anything. Like I say, my team's here, always here to help.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Again, thank you for participating. Thanks for spending your Tuesday afternoon with us. Thanks for all the questions. And finally, thank you very much to John for your excellent knowledge, experience, and advice.
No problem. Thanks, Chris.
Cheers, guys. Thanks a lot. See you next time.